Christy, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Big Hugs Woodland and Moose and Friends stamp set. So I've stamped the images I'll be using on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm going to start with my fox, and I'm going to be using my recently updated fox combo. So traditionally in the past I have always used YR12, YR14, and YR18, and then in my last card making video I added in the E19 to that, and I really enjoyed that addition to this combo, so that's what I'm using today. Starting with that E19, which is just going to provide so much more richness and depth of color, and I'm using that to lay in my shadows on the fox's body, mainly on the right hand side, but a little bit on the left hand side of his face as well, since that's turned a little bit more toward the viewer. And then I'm going to begin to blend that out with the YR18. These two colors blend really nicely together, but I am sticking really close to those outside edges because I don't want him to get so dark that you lose his features or can't really see the definition of his limbs and things. So I'm going to just work my way around his body, blending that color out, and then I'm going to switch to the YR14. So you could finish off with the YR14 if you didn't want to use 3 shades, but for me I felt like that was still a little bit too dark, so I am going to be using the 4 shades for this. I just find it gives you a really nice variation from the really dark of the E19 to the lightest of the YR12. So I'm just working around blending out the YR18 with the YR14 now. I'm going to leave a highlight on the top of his tail where the sun would be hitting that. And then I'll switch to the YR12, and I'm going to use that to fill in the rest of the orange parts of his body. I am going to leave the lower half of his face white, and I gave him some white socks on his paws. So I just stopped a little bit before the end for that. I did give him an orange belly this time, and I'm going to fill in the rest of his tail as I mentioned. And then I'm going to go right over that with a second layer. This is something I talk about in a lot of my videos, but it really does increase the depth and saturation of your coloring, and it makes your blends so much more seamless. And it's pretty quick and easy to do because you've already mapped out where all of the colors should go. So it's, you know, just laying in a second layer right over top of the first one, and it's definitely worth it, I think. So this also kind of gives you a chance to reassess your first layer. Like if you wanted a little bit of a deeper shadow, you could be more heavy-handed with your darkest colors on that second layer. But yeah, it's just really quick and easy to do. So now I am back down to my YR12, which is my lightest shade, just filling in any last little bits. And then for the white parts of his body, I'm going to give them a little bit of shading with E50 and E51. I'll add some color to the insides of the ears and then to the cheek parts on the lower half of his face. A little bit to blend the transition from his paws, from the orange part to the white, and also on the underside of his tail. And then I blended that out with the E50 and let that fade into the white cardstock for the highlight. And I'm also going to use these shades to do the lighter parts of my deer's body. So I'm doing the part around his eye and then also the inside of his ear and his tail. And then I decided to use the same shades for the top of the tree stump where that's been cut. And I did do a second layer of just the E51 for a bit more contrast. And I'm going to use those shades for my mushroom stems as well. So everything will be really tied in nicely together. Since I had those E50s out, I'm going to darken up that combo and finish up my deer. So I'm using E51, E53, and E55 for the darker parts of his body, still keeping it pretty light because I wanted this to be a young fawn since it has the white spots on the hindquarters, and so I wanted it to be just a very light dun color. So I used the E55 to lay in my shadows, also put a little shadow on the bridge of the nose, and then I'm just carefully coloring around the spots on his back. If you ended up coloring over them, you could use a white gel pen to just fill them in again, but I was pretty careful so I didn't have to. And then I'll use the E51 for the highlight. I decided to leave a white area on the chest as well, so I'm just bringing that color down and filling in the rest of his body, but skipping over that part. And then I will do a second layer for him as well, just to deepen that up and make that blend a little bit more smooth. So adding a little bit of shadow in the crease of the front legs where they're bent as well, just to give a little bit of definition there. And then bringing that E53 down, coloring carefully around those spots once again. And then I'm going to finish with that E51. So I do need to create a bit more transition from the white spot on his chest to the brown. So I will go back to my E50 for that and just add a little bit of blending between those. Then I'm going to switch to E55, E57, and E59. I'm using the darkest two shades for the little deer's hoof. And then I'm going to do the rest of the stump with these shades as well. And I wanted it to look like there were parts of the wood grain that were more indented than others. So I'm kind of picking and choosing a few spots that are going to be darker. So I added some of the E59 to those, and then I'm going to blend that out with the E57. Also just adding a bit of definition at the top and bottom of that stump with that E57. And then once I have that all done, I'm going to use the E55 and kind of fill in the remaining places on that stump. And that's just going to give me a bit more texture, as you can see. Next, I'm going to work on my raccoon, and I decided to go with the neutral grays today. So I'm using N0, N1, and N3 for the lighter parts of his body, which is the majority there. And so I'm using that N3 for my shadows, and then I'm going to blend that out with the N1, just making sure I color right over the edge of that N3 so that I'm pulling that darker color into the mid-tone, and then I'll fill in the rest with the N0. And then I'm going to jump straight into the second layer on him before I do the tail. So I'm just going back to that N3 and laying that shadow in, and then blending that out with the N1. And I didn't bother with the N0 for the second layer. I just felt like it wasn't necessary because the blend was pretty nice. And then I'm going to do the tail, and to make it easy on myself, I'm just going to do the whole tail in this lighter combo. And then when I add this darker combo, I can color right over the lighter shades, and you'll never know that I took the easy way out there. So I darkened up that combo to N3, N5, and N7, and I'll do the patches around his eyes, and then every other stripe on his tail. I'm making sure to put that N7 as far away from his actual eyeballs as possible so that they'll still be visible. So I want to make sure that I'm covering over them with that lightest shade so you can still see them. And then just blending toward the center on the tail. And then for the bunny, I decided to go with grays as well, but I wanted a different tone, so I went with warm grays. And I'm using W00, W1, and W3. For the body, I'm just using the W1 and the W00 because I wanted him to stay pretty light, almost like a very light gray or even a white bunny that just has some shading. My W1 leaked when I went to get to my second layer, but it's fine. It's a light enough marker that you'll probably never even notice. So I just took the other end of the lid off to help equalize the pressure inside, and continued coloring. And then for the tail, I did switch to adding a little of the W3 blended out with the W1. And now I'm ready to add in some rosy cheeks. I'm using R000, R11, and R20, and I will do the insides of their ears as well. So a little R20 is going on first, just an oval shape on the cheek and a little touch inside the ears. And then I'm blending that out with the R11. And once I'm done with that, I'm going to blend that out even further with the R000. I don't always use the R000 if the critters are darker, but since the cheek was going on all the light parts of the bodies, I decided to add in that R000. And now that that W1 has dried a bit, I can take my colorless blender and just push that deeper into the cardstock, so you'll never even know that that little splooge happened in the final image. Now I'm going to move on to my mushroom caps, and I wanted those to be red. I wanted to have a couple little pops of red on this card. So I'm using R22, R24, and R29 for that, using the R29 for the shadows, and then I'm going to blend that out with the R24, and again just carefully coloring around those little dots on the mushroom cap so they can stay white, and then I'll fill in the highlight with the R22. And I did do a second layer on those mushrooms as well. Since there's only just a couple pops of red on this card, I wanted them to be really nicely saturated and bright. So I just went over that. And then I'm going to color in my grasses. So I'm switching to G21, G24, and G29 for that. Little G29 for the shadows and all of the little grasses and leaves as well. And then I'll blend that out with the G24, which is going to be just the darkest two shades for some of those because there's not a lot of room in there for a lighter one. But there's a couple of leaves that are a bit larger, so for those I'm going to add in that G21 to finish those off and give them a bit more of a highlight. And then I will take my black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and I'm going to go over the eyes of my critters, just make them bright and shiny again, and just brings those images to life a bit more, I think. So just go over the eyes, and then I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm going to start off with a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock, and I wanted to do a very simple watercolor background using some Distress Oxides. So the first shade that I'm going to use is Salvage Patina, and I'm going to press that onto an acrylic block, and then I will paint that onto this piece of Bristol at the top of this scene. And I purposely am adding parts of it that are thicker ink and then parts of it are really blended out with the water because I want to have a bit of a variation in my sky. And then I'm going to use Mowed Lawn for the grass. So I will just clean my paintbrush and then add a bit of that down at the bottom. And once again, I want to keep some of those places a little bit darker and some lighter. So I will go back and grab a bit more ink and just make sure that I have some, different values of color in there. I'm going to go back to my sky and add a bit more color in there as well. And then once I'm happy with how this is looking, I will set this panel aside to dry while I work on the rest of my card. So I'm going to take the Hello Bluebird gallery frame number 4, and I'm going to die cut that out of some craft cardstock, and then again out of some wood grain cardstock. And I'm going to use the outer part of the wood grain frame and then the inner part of the craft frame that creates the 3 windows. And I want to pop these up as one, so I'm going to take some Scotch tape. This is just the regular tape that you buy at any store to wrap gifts with or whatever. And I'm going to tape those 2 pieces together so that they form one unit again. And this absolutely does not have to be pretty. You'll never see this on the final card. It's really just to hold these two pieces back together again. But once I have that all taped into one unit, I'm going to also line the back with some foam tape, and I want to make sure that it is really well supported, so when it goes through the mail nothing is going to collapse. So I will also put some foam tape in the little bar areas where it forms the different parts of the windows. And I'm using a Scotch 3M foam tape for that. So I use the full size for the frame, and then I cut down some thinner strips for these bars. And then I'm going to go back to my watercolor sky and ground piece, which has dried now, and I'm going to stamp part of my sentiment using VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I'm just using the word sending and stamping that down twice to make sure it's nice and bold. And then I can set this aside to dry, and I will pop in my card base, which is another piece of craft cardstock. This time I'm stamping in walnut ink on the inside, and I'm going to do the large cluster of animals and the sentiment and happy thoughts your way. So it'll all make sense in a minute once I get all the pieces together, but I did stamp that down 3 times for the sentiment and just twice for the critter stack. And then I have the last part of my sentiment, which is the scripty word hugs, and I'm going to stamp that in lobster ink because I wanted to tie in that red to the mushroom caps. So I stamped that down twice, and then I will trim that out with its matching die. So now I'm ready to start assembling. I'm going to peel off the release papers from my foam tape, and I'm going to line up that frame where I want it so that that word sending is in the top left corner of the window that it's in. And then I'll add some liquid glue to the back of this panel using my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue, and I will adhere that to the front of my craft card base. So just lining that up straight and pressing that down into place, and then I can bring in my images, and I've added foam tape to the back of all of those. I'm going to start with the tree stump in the taller window, and then I have my little deer and bunny image, and that's going to go in the lower right window. So just popping them down into place, and they're going to overhang on the outside edges of that craft frame, but that's totally fine. That's how I wanted that to look. Otherwise you could kind of tuck them under it, but little parts of their ears and tails would be cut off. Then I'll have my fox and raccoon standing on that stump, and I'm going to add those little red mushrooms around the stump. So just trying to figure out where I wanted them to go. I wasn't sure if I wanted to have them in a cluster of 2 or if I wanted one over on the right hand side, but ultimately I decided to do the cluster and then just put the extra grasses over on the right. So I'm just going to pop those back down, and I did have to tear off a little bit of the foam tape on that mushroom so it could overlap onto the stump and still be completely level. Then I also have that scripty hugs that I die cut, and I did add some foam tape to the back of that so it would be popped up as well. Just added a little bit of glue where it would overlap the craft part of the frame, and then I'm going to put that up in the top right window right under the word sending. And I forgot that I had one more little cluster of grass in that dish, so I'm going to go back and add that now. Once I was looking, I could see that it was missing the one that was supposed to be between the deer and the bunnies, so I'll just pop that into place. But I felt like something was missing from the card, so I decided to stamp out this little bird from the Carried Away stamp set. and I'm going to color him in to look like a robin so that he kind of matches the color palette that I've got going on. He'll have the brown tones of the frame and then the pinky red belly that kind of matches the mushrooms. So I used E59, E57, and E55 for his body. I'm making sure that the top of his head and then the base of his wings and tail are the darkest, and then kind of blending that out with the lighter shades as I get lower on his face and out toward the edges of his wings. And then for his belly, I'm going to go back to some of the pink tones that I used. I'm using the R22 down at the bottom, and then I'll blend that up with the R20. So basically I'm using the same shades that I used for the cheeks and the ears of the other critters, except I accidentally grabbed the R00 instead of the R000, but I decided to go with it. It was such a small area, and then used YR14 for the beak. And I will go back and add in his eyes with my gel pen so he matches the rest of the critters. And then I trimmed him out with his matching dye, and then I popped him up with some foam tape, and I'm going to add him in that top right corner where the sentiment is to kind of fill in that empty space. And that is going to finish off this card. I decided not to add any glitter or anything. I just liked it as is. So there is another peek at the inside, and I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a video. I post new ones every Monday and Friday. All of the products I use will be listed and linked in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. I want to thank you guys so much for spending your time with me today. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.